Well, it might have finally happened. We might actually have version 11.3 being released into the wild in the next couple of days. And as part of that release, we actually have version 11.3 release notes. Let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. So this is from Not a Tesla App, which has always been amazing about putting out the release notes as soon as they're available. I did see like the first page of it late last night before I went to sleep, but I was like, well, we only have the first page, and I'm glad I waited because actually there is a hidden gem amongst the later release notes. So without further ado, I'm going to go into these release notes and discuss them one at a time as they come. The first few are relatively self-explanatory, and we've actually already talked about them with earlier versions of the FSD Beta 11 release notes that have been sort of hodgepodge released. One of the really exciting things about this is that we're actually seeing the full release notes here, which, you know, in previously we would see like one note and then another note and then a page of it and not the whole thing. So it's very exciting that we're actually seeing the entire release notes, this version of it. So I'm, fingers crossed this will be coming to the OG beta testers first and then the rest of us very shortly afterwards. All right, so beginning at the beginning with the one that everyone has been waiting anxiously for, which is enabled FSD beta on the highway. If you don't know, currently when you go onto the highway, if you're driving full self-driving beta and you're driving through the city streets and you see the red, side borders for where the edge of the road is and all of that stuff and the pretty colors. And as soon as you merge onto the highway, sometime right around the merge point, it goes back to this kind of very plain looking, version of that. That is the legacy stack that they're going to talk about here. And they are finally, after years, replacing the legacy stack on the highway with the full self-driving new version. The new hotness is going to be replacing the old boring stuff that was on the stack that was there on the highway before. So anyway, enabled full self-driving beta on the highway. This unifies the vision and planning stack on and off highway and replaces the legacy highway stack, which is over 4 years old. Holy crap. The legacy highway stack still relies on several single camera and single frame networks. And if you don't know what that means, it's not the surround video that we're used to now that does a good vector space representation. So it is very old. It also works very well considering all things. So anyway, but it was, it's a very old version of this software. Anyway, it was set up to handle simple lane-specific maneuvers. So in other words, stay in your lane change, get off the highway, get on the highway, things like that. So very simplistic kind of thing, which works on the highway because highways are, access controlled. They don't have as much stuff going on. So it actually works pretty well. Anyway, FSD Beta's multi-camera video networks and next-gen planner that allows for more complex agent interactions with less reliance on lanes makes way for adding more intelligent behaviors, smoother control, and better decision-making. So overall, what we're going to get is more human-like driving, less robotic driving. If you have used the old, beta stack, even if you're not using FSD Beta, if you're driving Autopilot on the highways with your Tesla, you know what this is. So, even if you didn't pay for the full beta, whatever, or even if you're not experiencing that, if you're driving Autopilot on the highway and it's making lane changes and stuff, that is this old stack that's working. And it was very kind of hard-coded, kind of robotic. It's like turn on the blinker, wait for the person to jiggle the steering wheel, wait 3 seconds, something like that, and then move very slowly into the faster lane. And in the meantime, somebody in that lane is coming up behind you and you're being rude to them. So I'm sure you've all experienced that. You get the driving behavior that is not quite human enough to be very effective. So anyway, it works. It's very safe, but it's kind of rude. It doesn't, there's just a lot of stuff that feels a little robotic. So anyway, this is going to be a huge change. I think that the big reason why this has taken so long to roll out, the version 11, is specifically because the old version, while it was robotic and had some problem areas, was extremely reliable. And so the bar is so high on the highway that in order to leap over that and for Tesla to feel comfortable with releasing this new version, it had to, as close as possible, match that. And then, of course, the general thing is when you get new software, new architecture, you have this kind of level of stuff going on, right? It's reached kind of a plateau, and then usually you drop, and then you come back up and you actually go higher than the old level because you've got an improved software. But at the beginning, there's a little bit of a drop in performance, and I don't think Tesla wants that as much as possible because they have 362,000 plus full self-driving beta users in the US. I don't know how many in Canada, but and then they want to roll it out to the world. So they want this to be as high as possible. So I'm pretty sure that that's the main reason why this has taken a really long time to come out, because they want this to be really, really good. Anyway, but when we get this, when you drive this the first couple times on the highway, don't expect it to behave the same as the old version. So keep a specific eye out on that. I've gotten very used to the way that the Autopilot stack works on the highway, so I'm going to have to remind myself, this is new software. It's going to behave differently. Pay attention, a lot of attention for the first couple hundred miles you drive on the highway. So just a warning to everybody. All right. So anyway, the next note up here is actually very, very exciting. Added voice driver notes. And after an intervention, you can now send Tesla an anonymous voice message describing your experience to help improve Autopilot. So there used to be a camera button. So it used to be like the car would do something stupid and you're like, boop, and you hit the camera button, which was tiny. It was really, really hard to press. And, so especially after an intervention, you're like thinking about all the stuff that was going on. But anyway, you would press that button and it would send some sort of feedback back to Tesla. But of course, it was basically probably just a thumbs down. It was a basic, like, that didn't work like I expected it to. Now there's going to be this voice annotation thing, which is hopefully as easy as just pushing a button on the steering wheel and saying like, oh, the car tried to get over into a lane that was a turn only lane and I was trying to go straight. It was, a problem with that. So they can then associate that with the actual clip that they can then transmit to the mothership. So that should be a much more robust manner of feedback. So, versus right now where we have no feedback whatsoever except jerking the steering wheel, to the older feedback, which was thumbs up, thumbs down, basically just thumbs down. It was a single data point. You could either click the camera button, which was a thumbs down, or you didn't do anything. So now we will be able to add context and let them understand if there is a situation where they're like, why did they feel like they had to disengage Autopilot there? They can actually go, probably this will be translated into text to keep it anonymous, but they can go into that and they can look at it and hear what the person says about the situation. So this should improve the edge cases for Tesla's full self-driving beta very, very rapidly. So that's a very exciting thing. That's new with version 11.3. Have not seen that before. A lot of this stuff is new with version 11.3. This next one is great whether you're driving full self-driving beta or not. Expanded automatic emergency braking, or AEB. And if you're driving any modern car, you probably have experienced that where, if you're coming up fast on a car in front of you, it'll go and stop or something like that, right? Anyway, to handle vehicles that cross the ego's path. So previously, a lot of cars will stop if you're behind a car and they slam their brakes on it, will automatically stop. I don't know of any cars that do that with crossing vehicles. So we're talking about somebody crossing across this. And specifically, this includes cases where other vehicles run their red light or turn across the ego's path, stealing the right of way. I love that. Replay of previous collisions of this type suggests that 49%, or basically half, of the events would be mitigated by the new behavior. This improvement is now active in both manual driving and autopilot operations. So whether you're driving full self-driving beta or not, as soon as this version of the software rolls out to your vehicle, you get this for free. So this is great. I mean, this is a basic safety feature. This means if somebody blows a red light, blows a stop sign, I actually have a friend, Mars Embassy. So you should check out his YouTube channel. He does great work down in South Padre Island, but somebody just went right through a red light and hit the back of his car. Now, I don't know if emergency braking in this situation would have helped because the guy clipped the back of his car, but a situation where you're beginning to pull out into an intersection where you have right of way and somebody just goes zoom right through that, right? That's the situation where automatic emergency braking, maybe you don't see it. Maybe even possibly you're in a lane where a car is blocking you. And so you're pulling out and pulling ahead and somebody comes through and you don't see it. So there's just no way a human being will see it. If the car sees it, it can brake and it can stop whether or not you're in full self-driving. Even if you're driving the car, it can do that. So this should be an amazing safety thing. It looks like for these circumstances, half the accidents that would have occurred in these situations could be mitigated or, in other words, gotten rid of by this. So this is a fantastic, fantastic upgrade. This is something that, fingers crossed you won't have to experience this very often in your life. But if and when it happens, you're going to be really, really happy that it's there and that you didn't continue accelerating into that vehicle, because that turns the day into a very, very bad day. Following up on this, the next one is improved autopilot reaction time to red light runners and stop sign runners by 500 milliseconds, or half of 1 second, by increased reliance on objects' instantaneous kinematics along with trajectory estimates. So it's basically able to react more quickly. If you think about, human reaction time, you have to go, you're moving through the intersection, you see somebody coming, you're like, are they going to run the red light or the stop sign, or are they actually stopping? That kind of momentary decision where you're trying to go, like, you're projecting the path of the other vehicle and trying to figure out whether it's going to blow through the stop sign or the red light and whether you can continue on. Well, that takes a certain period of time. And basically they're saying that, they're taking a half a second off that decision-making process, which is pretty huge in a situation like that, because a half a second, if you're going, 10, 15 meters per second, you can cross, if you're going 20 meters per second, you can cross 10 meters in a half a second. So 10 meters is the difference between you being, nowhere close to that vehicle and being right in front of that vehicle. So this is a really big deal. Even if you're traveling much slower than that as you're accelerating out through there, this is a really big deal. So, a half a second might not seem like a lot, but in circumstances like this, just a meter or a couple of feet or something is the difference between being hit by the car or not being hit by the car. So this is a really big deal too. So those previous notes were relatively understandable. Probably if you read the release notes, you're like, I got this. We start getting into the weeds here a little bit in the next ones. Anyway, so the next one up is added a long-range highway lanes network to enable earlier response to blocked lanes and high curvature. So long-range highway lanes network, this is something where you might have seen as we moved into full self-driving beta, and especially vision only without the radar systems involved, you may have seen that the distance that the car could see was reduced to, at a guess, 100 meters. This is something from AI Day. I was told by one of the lead engineers at Tesla that the volume that they had was about 20 meters behind the vehicle and about 100 meters in front of the vehicle. That's all that it could see due to limitations of the occupancy network and things like that. And we're going to get to the occupancy network in just a minute. But by enabling a long-range highway lanes network, and I'm not positive that this is exactly related to occupancy networks, but it must have something to do with that. But anyway, to be able to see past 100 meters on the highway is really good because you're traveling really fast when you're on the highway. A football field, you cover that in very, very little time while you're driving at highway speeds. So being able to see double or triple that is actually very, very beneficial. That means that you can see things like blocked lanes. For example, if there's traffic in a lane, or if there's construction cones that do that thing where they block off a lane or something like that, it can see that much, much further away. And it can also see if a high velocity area like a highway or potentially a back road that's also got high speed limits on it is curving radically, so that it doesn't do that. Currently what the car does is it slows down pretty late before that. So a good driver, if you're hitting a high curvature situation, will brake into that curve and then accelerate out of that curve. That's just, classic good driving behavior. The car currently brakes pretty late before the curve, which means that it's not really seeing it early enough, and it's not able to predict that and feed that into the policy network and say, slow down a little more smoothly and then accelerate out of this curve. So anyway, we should see much, much better behavior on highways, but also on high speed back roads and things like that have high curvature. Think windy mountain roads, stuff like that, right? Where the car, it's doing this kind of stuff. It's not going to brake radically and then accelerate into the curve and then brake radically. It'll be able to do it more smoothly by having this longer range ability to see things, because it'll see the curves coming up. It'll see blocked lanes coming up much sooner. So it will be able to react much sooner, which not only makes you feel more comfortable in a vehicle, but also is safer, because the harder you slam on the brakes, the more opportunity the guy behind you is going to hit you, right? Because if they're not paying attention and you slam on your brakes at the last second, they can easily make a mistake and hit you. Not your fault, but it's no accident is better than any accident, even if it's not your fault. This next one I'm still digesting because I don't know exactly what they're talking about by candidate trajectory, and I'll explain that in a minute. But anyway, let's read this thing first. Reduce goal pose prediction error for candidate trajectory neural network by 40% and reduced runtime by 3x. This was achieved by improving the dataset using heavier and more robust offline optimization, increasing the size of this improved dataset by 4 times, and implementing a better architecture and feature space. So the question I don't really have an answer to is the candidate trajectory. I don't know if they're talking about your vehicle, the ego vehicle, or all of the other vehicles in the scene. I don't know, and it maybe means all of them. I'm not exactly positive. Anyway, if somebody from Tesla wants to jump on and let me know, I would love to find out the answer to that. But basically, goal pose is like, where is, if you think about your car, let me just take my glasses case here. I can use it as a little example here. So, this goal pose would be going like straight in a lane, and another goal pose might be like turn 45 degrees, and another one might be like 90 degrees, something like that. So it's like the position, if you think about it like top down on a map, like what position it's in. So it needs to, what it does is the vehicle is projecting out for itself and for other vehicles in the scene possible trajectories to go on. Now, most of the time that's pretty simple. If you're just driving down a lane, there's like one candidate trajectory. It's just go straight. But when you get to like an intersection, or if you have to move over lanes or something like that, there may be like 100 different minor adjustments to the move that you have to make in order to reach the place that you want to get to. And at the end of that move, you need to be in a certain position, a pose, something like that, at least as far as I understand this. And again, I'm doing the best I can here from the outside. But anyway, you need to be in that position at the end of this. And if you're erroneous in the way that you're projecting that final goal pose, it probably has an effect on all of these candidate trajectories that you might possibly take. So again, this is the kind of thing where you can analogize this to a human being. If you come up on a complicated intersection, let's say that there's construction going on in the middle or something like that, that makes it not obvious, you and your brain are going like, well, okay, I can go around this side of the construction. I can go around this side of the construction. I need to deal with the traffic coming the other way. How am I going to do this? So, you can calculate in your head, usually very rapidly and without thinking too explicitly about this, but you think to yourself, all right, what are the opportunities that I have? Which directions can I go? Well, your Tesla is always doing this. It doesn't show you this on the display screen, but we have seen this during presentations at AI Day and other events where they show the candidate projections going out in multiple, different tendrils. And that's the kind of thing when you see the little noodle in front of you kind of wavering back and forth, that's where the highest probability candidate projection is changing from one to another. So that's the thing where you can actually see it even on the end user version of this. So anyway, it appears that reducing the goal pose prediction error, in other words, where you're expected to end up, that actually is very helpful. I wouldn't have known that by default, but anyway, it appears to be very helpful, and it's necessary to do this. So first of all, they've reduced the error in that so that they've got the car more exactly there by 40%, which is great. But even more so, they've reduced the runtime by 3x. So if it used to take like 9 milliseconds to do this part of the calculation, they're now down to 3 milliseconds, which is a huge, huge improvement. And then, of course, the part that's highlighted in blue is how they did this. Better data set, better offline optimization, increasing the size of the data set by 4x, and implementing a better architecture and feature space. So that's the engineering details. The point of it all, again, I'm not exactly sure, because it could be talking about candidate trajectories for the vehicles that are around you, could be talking about candidate trajectory for the ego vehicle, the one you're in, or it could be all candidate trajectories. More than likely, it's probably all candidate trajectories in the entire scene. So reducing the runtime of this by 3x is huge, because this obviously takes a long time at a complicated intersection where there's potentially dozens of other vehicles you're having to keep track of. Next up, improved occupancy network detections. See, I told you we'd get back to occupancy networks. Improved occupancy network detections by oversampling on 180,000 challenging videos, including rain reflections, road debris, and high curvature. So there's a lot of stuff with high curvature this time. I didn't know that they were having this much trouble with it, but I personally, and I know that Scott Walter going ballistic, and you've seen a lot of videos that I've done with him. He lives in Florida where it rains all the bloody time. And he says that rain reflections are a significant issue for him sometimes. So, what you could see is, let's say that, I don't know, something weird like a billboard of an automobile, right? It's like, come to the Ford dealership and buy an auto. Then it just rained, and that could reflect off the road. And so you're seeing a reflection of an automobile on the asphalt of the road, but that's a reflection, not a real car. And so your car, the FSD Beta could be going like, oh no, is that a car or is that a reflection? I don't know. And so it freaks out and it stops or something like that. So it's not a good situation. You don't want that to happen. So clearly what they did was they found 180,000 of these kind of situations where the vehicle was not behaving right. I personally have had that happen a few times with rain reflections, but more often it's road debris. It might be something like a paper bag in the road or something. And it's like, well, yeah, you'll probably drive over that. No big deal, but the car will kind of freak out or something, So anyway, that kind of thing. High curvature, again, I think it's just the experience for us users is that it breaks too late into the curve. So anyway, they found 180,000 of these nasty situations and they oversampled, which means that they basically, let's say there was 1 million data points in this data set. It was probably much higher than that. But anyway, so this was like 18% of that hypothetical data set. If you double this thing, so you just basically duplicate these 180,000 to turn them into 360,000, you're now up to 36% of the data set. So by simple oversampling, just basically just repeating this data more often than it should be there, you're showing the training network this more often than it would normally get. And therefore it's able to train on it and it's able to do a better job of distinguishing between a real vehicle on the road and the reflection of a billboard of an automobile on the road, something like that. Next up, we have improved recall for close-by cut-in cases by 20% by adding 40,000 auto-labeled fleet clips of this scenario to the dataset. Also improved handling of cut-in cases by improved modeling of their motion into ego's lane, leveraging the same for smoother lateral and longitudinal control for cut-in objects. So first of all, a quick reminder, recall is all about false negatives. You want to get rid of situations where your car brakes because it thinks somebody's going to cut into your lane when it's not going to. So maybe the guy just moves over a little bit and then backs off or, something along those lines. So it would be a false braking situation where the car goes like, holy crap, I need to brake right now. And there was no reason for it. And you as a human are usually like, come on, it was obviously the guy wasn't going to cut me off. So anyway, it looks like what they're talking about here is getting rid of some of those braking situations where the car shouldn't brake. And they say they've reduced that by 20%. So, if you experience 5 of those in a week, normally you would be down to 4 of those. So that is a significant improvement. And the way they did this, of course, was they added 40,000 auto-labeled fleet clips. So this is great. This means the AI is just labeling this itself, which means that humans don't really have to interact with that, which means it's much, much faster. And then just as importantly, if the person does cut you off, the second sentence there is it improves the handling of cut-in cases by improved modeling of their motion into the ego's lane. So if the person does cut you off, how exactly is it moving? How strongly do you need to brake? Do you have to slam the brakes on or can you just tap the brakes or just take your foot off the accelerator a little bit? Again, human analogy, we do this all the time. Person cuts us off and you flip them off or something, but you also know approximately how much you need to brake in order to not hit the car in front of you. It's usually not slam the brakes on. It's usually like tap the brakes or take your foot off the accelerator. The slam the brakes on are the very aggressive cases. But a lot of times, at least in Georgia, people, if they find a tiny little gap, will just go vip and get in front of you and you have to react to them. But it's normally not a big giant slam on the brakes, whereas a lot of times the Tesla, when it's in full self-driving, will slam the brakes on too hard. So hopefully the result of this is that if somebody does cut into your lane, it will react a little bit better and more humanly. Next up, we have added lane guidance, and I think there should be an end quote mark after lane guidance because of the next note. Anyway, so quote, lane guidance module and perpetual loss to the road edges and lines network, improving the absolute recall of lines by 6% and the absolute recall of road edges by 7%. So it's unclear if this lane guidance module is only for the highways or for everything, but I think given that it's a single stack, it probably means it's for everything. So city driving, highway driving, etc. Basically what we're talking about, again, recall is false negatives. So I guess it was seeing things like lane edges and stuff like that where there weren't lane edges. It's reducing the amount of false observations of road edges, lane edges, things like that, where it shouldn't be seeing them. I haven't personally experienced too many situations where it does that. It seems to be pretty good at that. So maybe that's the reason why this is only a 6% and 7% reduction. But, obviously if you're driving down the road and the thing suddenly sees that there's like an edge of the road that tucks in or something, and the car's going to go, oh crap, I don't have room anymore to be in this lane. So I need to move over. So it might have to do some sort of emergency move when it doesn't need to at all. So I imagine that that's what's going on here. Again, I personally haven't had that much experience with it. If you have, definitely let me know in the comments because I would be very interested in that. But as far as I understand, that's what it's doing is it's reducing some situations where it's detecting lane edges and road edges where it shouldn't be. And, 6 and 7% is not that much. But again, I haven't experienced very many situations where it's even a problem. So we're probably looking at a relatively minor thing for most people, but it's still improving it. So that's great. And the next note is obviously related to the previous one, improved overall geometry and stability of lane predictions by updating the quote lane guidance module representation with information relevant to predicting crossing and oncoming lanes. So maybe as per the previous note, maybe the place where it was detecting lanes and edges of the road where it shouldn't be actually had to do with intersections in particular, because it looks like that's what they're talking about here with the information relevant to predicting crossing and oncoming lanes. So basically, as it's going through intersections, there's lanes that are crossing, there's potentially lanes that go right and left, and all sorts of crazy things can happen. So under those circumstances, that may be the particular place where these networks are having the most trouble, and having a more stable lane predictions is good because, again, if you see the noodle ever when you're going through an intersection and it starts wiggling, that's not necessarily a good thing because that means it doesn't know exactly where it's going and maybe the lanes are shifting around and things like that. If you see that sort of dancing thing where you're seeing lanes shifting around like that, or you're seeing the truck next to you shifting in space, that's not a good thing because that means that there's no temporal cohesion for the network. So the more rock solid this stuff is, the better. And my, prediction would be because of these upgrades, what we're going to see is the lanes aren't going to shift like that in complex situations like intersections where you have to go through. And if it's predicting the lane and it's doing a good job and it's not wiggling back and forth, that would be the indication to you that you're going to be seeing something that's behaving more robustly under these circumstances. This next one is the most exciting thing that I see in these release notes, and I think most of you are going to agree with me if you've driven FSD Beta. Improved handling through high speed and high curvature scenarios by offsetting towards inner lane lines. Thank goodness, finally. So if you don't know this, the vehicle is extremely good about staying centered in the lane, which is great under normal circumstances where you're driving straight. But as the car enters a turn, it stays right in the center. And the way us humans work, and honestly, the better way to take a trajectory through a turn is to always bias towards the inside of that turn. So again, if you're turning like this, you want to bias towards the inside of that turn. So you kind of hug the line at the edge of that turn, right? You don't want to be out towards the middle of the turn because as people are coming the other direction, they're going to be hugging the middle line as they're making their turn, and you don't want to be out there near them. It's very uncomfortable as a driver that the car stays dead center in the middle as vehicles come over. And in fact, if you want to check this video out, I did a thing with Scott with Going Ballistic where we talked through Dan O'Dowd's Super Bowl ad where he showed a person disengage full self-driving as he was going through a high turn when a BMW was coming the other way, and you could see the BMW crossing into the double yellow line. And it was obvious watching that the person freaked out because the car was biasing towards the center and he jerked the car to pull it away. Now, the car would have been safe if he hadn't touched it, but that feeling of like, oh, we're way too far out in this lane right now, we're too close to that other car is scary and it makes people uncomfortable. So this is going to be a massive quality of life improvement if it works as advertised. All it is just as you're in the center of the lane, and as you enter the curb, you just bias towards the inside of that curve, whether it's left or right, doesn't really matter. That is going to make people much, much happier. So thank you to Tesla's full self-driving AI team. Really appreciate this personally because it's one of those things I've kind of gotten okay with it and I let the car do its thing, but it does not make me comfortable. And I guarantee you when Sandy Monroe sees this, he's going to be jumping up and down too, because this is something he complains about all the time as well. I think this next one is going to have a huge quality of life improvement as well for us drivers. Improved lane changes, including earlier detection and handling for simultaneous lane changes, better gap selection when approaching deadlines, better integration between speed-based and nav-based lane change decisions, and more differentiation between the full self-driving profiles with respect to speed lane changes. So a lot of words here, but basically the problem that I always talk about with doing full self-driving, and I've demonstrated this on several of my test drives that I've got videos, and I'll post one of them up here at least. But anyway, the car does not do a good job of translating between the navigation data, which is, Google Maps or something saying like, you need to get into this lane eventually to, enter onto the highway or something like that. I call it midterm planning. I don't know internally what Tesla calls it, but the differentiation between the navigation data and the second to second don't hit another car data, there's like a 10, 20, 30-second gap in there where the car needs to be making decisions about what lanes it needs to get into. And it does a really, really bad job. That's like the worst part of full self-driving right now. So I think what we're talking about here is that it's going to do a better job of understanding when it needs to get over, because it's going to be dealing with the integration between navigation and speed-based data. It's going to figure out which gaps it needs to get into. It's going to do it more smoothly. It's going to position itself better so that it's able to get into these lanes that it absolutely has to get into early enough that it will be comfortable for the user, and we won't either have to intervene or watch the vehicle just miss the turn entirely because it didn't get over soon enough. And then this last part, you are able to choose when you do full self-driving beta between like assertive mode, I think normal, and then chill mode. And I always have it in assertive because I just want it to do things like that. But apparently this means that if you have it in chill mode, it's going to get into that lane earlier, even if that means it's going to have to wait longer, right? Because there's more traffic and there's more traffic in that lane. It won't be as assertive about moving forward, to within 0.2 miles or something before it jumps into the lane that it needs to jump into. So it should be better about differentiating between the mode that you have selected. If you pick chill, it'll overindulge in getting over into a lane early, even if there's a big line of traffic in that lane, and it means it's going to take you longer to get up to where you need to go. That's generally what chill drivers do. I'm not that kind of person, but that's also good because it means if you're in assertive mode, it will try to get as far forward as is reasonable before it jumps over. Next up, improved longitudinal control response smoothness by better modeling the possible effect of lead vehicles' brake lights on their future speed profiles. So with my awesome props, longitudinal, so this is a car in front of you, this is your car. Longitudinal just means this direction, right? This would be lateral or latitudinal motion. This is longitudinal. So basically, this guy up here in front of you, well, this is hard to do backwards. This guy up here in front of you turns their brake lights on. Generally speaking, if you're driving at any kind of, high speeds or something, my normal reaction to that is to take my foot off the accelerator, but not quite brake yet. And what generally has been happening in the past is that the Tesla would see the brake lights, kind of ignore them until it came up pretty fast on the rear end of this car, and then have to brake relatively strongly in order to not hit the vehicle in front of it. And that's an uncomfortable situation. It just feels like it needs to react sooner. So anyway, what it looks like here is it's going to be modeling out, it sees the brake lights, and instead of kind of ignoring it, it's going to go like, okay, what are the trajectory predictions that I can make about what this person is going to do, how fast they're going to slow down. And so it's hopefully going to react a little bit sooner to the brake lights so that it will behave in a smoother manner and make us users more comfortable. So throughout these notes, you can see a kind of repeated thing about quality of life. I kind of, I guess, I don't know that Tesla would call it that, but I'm calling it quality of life. It's just things to make us drivers feel more comfortable and less likely to pull it out of full self-driving. They're not absolutely safety critical things, and that's actually a really good sign that we're moving beyond safety critical to quality of life, because the car is very, very safe. It doesn't really want to hit things, stuff like that, right? So it's behaving very, very safely second to second, but there are quality of life issues where it doesn't behave as well as we humans wish it would. So anyway, this is all to the good, and I highly applaud Tesla's AI team for doing this work. Next up, we have improved detection of rare objects by 18% and reduced the depth error to large trucks by 9%, primarily from migrating to more densely supervised auto-labeled data sets. So the densely supervised auto-labeled data sets, I assume that's humans looking at the data sets and making sure that everything is labeled. But basically rare objects, I ran across a ladder. I didn't hit the ladder, but I saw a ladder on the highway one day that obviously fell off the back of a truck. That's a rare object. It's like I've seen one of those, maybe two in my entire life. So that's a pretty rare object to be on the road. But, again, detecting those rare objects is really important, because if the car drove over a ladder, that would be disastrous for the car. I was doing, 65 miles an hour on a highway. And if I hit that, it probably would have ruined the car. It would have done some really bad damage to it. So anyway, even if it's a rare object, it needs to be able to detect that. And it's good that they've improved the detection by 18%. And then depth detection to large trucks is actually also very good. Previously, the vehicles seem to have some issues with that. You see trucks, much more than cars, the trucks kind of jiggle when you see the visualization, which means it's not doing a fantastic job of understanding exactly where that truck is in space. And I don't know if it has to do with the size of the vehicle, the fact that the vehicle kind of spreads out across multiple cameras. You know, cars are generally small enough that they fit in one of the camera views, and trucks are not. They cross many of the cameras because they're very large. So I would guess that we're looking at better integration of the multi-camera videos so that it's able to understand what a truck is and where it is and the ground truth of that more appropriately than it was. So anyway, that ability to detect trucks with a 9% greater accuracy is going to be good because you won't potentially get too close to it when you're behind it, but also it's going to understand how far it is side to side as you're driving along. Because again, when it's watching that jiggly thing going back and forth, that's not a comforting, thing to see that your car is not really understanding exactly where that truck is. So the result again for us humans is that we should see the truck much more locked in the lanes as we're driving around it than it has been. And that should give a lot more confidence to us human drivers. Next up is an important safety one. Improved semantic detections for school buses by 12% and vehicles transitioning from stationary to driving by 15%. This was achieved by improving dataset label accuracy and increasing dataset size by 5%. So semantic detection just means it understands it is a school bus rather than just some large vehicle or something, right? It would be very helpful, honestly. I don't know if Tesla wants to do this, but for visualization, it would be great if they had an actual visualization of a school bus, as opposed to right now, I just think it makes it look like a truck or something like that, which, it doesn't give you the confidence that it knows it's a school bus because, of course, your behavior around a school bus should be very different than from around most other vehicles on the road. You have to be super careful, and when the stop sign comes out, you have to make sure you stop. But you just have to be extra aware when you're around a school bus. So anyway, detecting school buses 12% more is a really, really good thing. And I think in order to help us feel more confident, if they did have a visualization of a school bus, that would be very, very helpful so that we know that the car is detecting that specifically as a school bus. And then the other piece of this, and I've actually had this happen, I think it was yesterday actually, is I was in full self-driving and a car was stopped, but it was not parked. It was just stopped on the road on the side. And my car began to pull out around it and the car started up, right? The person started driving, which was kind of dumb on their part because they should have been paying attention and not started up at the same time. So we ended up kind of running parallel for a while and I disengaged and backed off and went back behind. I didn't know exactly what my car would do in full self-driving. But anyway, this upgrade to the network should allow it to see that and detect it more accurately and to be able to make a better decision about what to do about a vehicle that's going from stationary to in motion. Almost to the end here, folks. Thanks for sticking with me. Next up, we have improved decision-making at crosswalks by leveraging neural network-based ego trajectory estimation in place of approximated kinematic models. So this is crosswalk behavior, but it doesn't have to do with the pedestrians in a crosswalk. It has to do with the ego car, which is the thing that you're sitting in. So I guess previously what it was doing was just treating it like a Newtonian object, right? It was like you're going forward at 10 meters per second and the car weighs, 2,000 kilograms or 1,500 kilograms, whatever. And it just did basic equations. And it was like, how long would it take to stop and things like that. So a relatively crude model about how all of this works and whether the car is able to stop as a person comes out into the road, whether it should keep going, things like that. So it was a relatively crude calculation and obviously worked okay. But the car tended to be a little bit aggressive about stopping in situations where it probably shouldn't. And consider that I'm driving around on college campuses, all the time because I'm going back and forth to work. I get this over and over again because a student will come up and they'll look at me like they're about to cross the road, but they're not actually in the intersection and the car will brake kind of aggressively. And I was like, in that situation, probably the car should have just gone ahead and gone through. That's what I would do as a human driver. So hopefully by using a neural network based ego trajectory estimation, which will be more accurate, it will have a better idea of how smoothly it can stop versus whether it should just continue going on when there's a pedestrian that looks like they might be about to enter the intersection intersection. Now, obviously, if they're standing in front of you in the road, you have to stop this. There's no question about that, but it's those kind of weird edge cases where a person is like at the edge of the crosswalk and they look like they're about to cross, but they're not. And it's like, okay, my car, if I absolutely slam the brakes on, yeah, I could stop and let them go through. But the more likely better behavior at that point would just be to continue on, because there's no way this person's going to get out in front of you before the car would pass completely through the intersection. So again, hopefully this will lead to behavior that I will be able to see on a kind of a daily basis, which is that we will see the vehicle behave better around crosswalks as pedestrians are in the vicinity of the crosswalk. Next up, I believe we're back to the highway. In this situation, we've got improved reliability and smoothness of merge control by deprecating legacy merge region tasks in favor of merge topologies derived from vector lanes. So it's not explicitly saying highway here, but I think what we're looking at is as you enter a highway, there's a thing, there's an extra lane that then eventually disappears for you to speed up and enter the highway traffic. And so the merge control currently that happens with the legacy stack is pretty crude. It kind of sticks all the way to the right, merges last second. Obviously, there's sort of a task-based thing. It's like, where am I? What do I need to do now? Oh, I'm at the end of the lane. I need to merge into the lane. That's not fantastic behavior. Oftentimes, when I'm merging onto highways, I will actually take over to do it more carefully, because if there's traffic around, I want to make sure I get in better. So what we've got instead of merge region tasks is merge topologies and using vector lanes. So it's projecting this out into a 3D game space as if it was a 3D game, understanding this lane better, where you can begin to merge, where you can end a merge, how the lane is collapsing, all of those kinds of things. It's taking account of that better through a more modern architecture, which should lead to much, much better merge behavior. So fingers crossed that will actually happen, because that is a definite problem getting on and off freeways. And then this last one, I believe, has to do more with data collection than with actual driving experience. So we probably won't notice this, at least if I understand this correctly, but it's very important. Anyway, unlocked longer fleet telemetry clips by up to 26% by balancing compressed IPC buffers and optimized write scheduling across twin SoCs. So first of all, IPC means inter-process communication, and SoC is system on chip. So if you remember hardware 3 and also hardware 4 will have this as well, but you've got two chips on there that are parallel to each other. They're the redundant chips essentially, but Tesla is now utilizing both of these chips. So the inter-process communication is basically going back and forth between these two chips and communicating between them, between the two SoCs. So essentially what's happening here, I believe, is that they're able to increase by 26% the amount of telemetry that they're able to ship back to the mothership for training. So my best understanding of how long they have is about 10-second clips. I could be wrong about that, but that's what I've heard. So that's what I think. So anyway, we're going from about 10 seconds to somewhere in the order of 12.5 or 13 seconds. So it is a substantial increase in the amount of time window that they will have access to for their data. So it's a pretty substantial increase, however you want to look at this. And again, this is nothing that we're going to directly interact with, I believe. It's just something where they're going to be able to take in more data, and the more context you have around weird events happening, the better. So you want to see stuff that happened before some weird event happened, right? So if, for example, there is that ladder on the road kind of situation, the more distance that you can go back, if you can go back from 10 seconds to 13 seconds, it gives you more time. And so if we're coming up on this ladder and we only have like 8 seconds, because maybe there's 2 seconds after the ladder, we cross it over or something like that. If we go from having 8 seconds to like 10.5 or 11 seconds of data before, it's a big advantage to Tesla to be able to see that, because you'll see the object much smaller farther up the road and be able to utilize that to detect it earlier, because obviously the earlier you detect something like that, if you detect it early enough, you move over into another lane. If you detect it very, very late, you have to slam the brakes on and potentially hit it. So even a couple of seconds, it might not seem like that big a deal, but that should make a really, really big difference to the data collection and the ability to train for these weird edge cases that they're looking at. All right, so there you have it. It's a lot of details. It's pretty fantastic stuff. Again, overall, it looks like what they're doing is they're moving from safety critical tasks to more quality of life tasks. And I, for one, consider this, and obviously going to the full stack on the highway, which is the banner thing, that's the obvious thing that people are talking about. But I am really, really happy to see that Tesla is now focusing on things that are more about quality of life and less about safety critical stuff, because that means that they feel like they've, to a large extent tackled the safety critical stuff, and they're now moving to making this a better experience for us drivers. And I'm very excited about that. And of course, I'm super excited to get version 11.3 as soon as I do, and I will do a test drive as soon as I have it. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it fun and interesting and thought-provoking. If you did, please do like it so other people can find it. And of course, consider subscribing for more of this kind of content. As always, a huge shout out to my patrons on Patreon. Thank you all so much for your support. I truly do appreciate it. You really do make this worthwhile for me. And of course, if you want to join the team, just check out the link in the description. And if you're interested in a whole bunch of really cool merch, check out our merch store. Link is in the description. We have Tesla Bot t-shirts, the Tesla meme t-shirt, Success is a Possible Outcome, 4680 battery cells. All of that stuff is on t-shirts, mugs, tumblers, and on and on. So check it out. And finally, don't forget we are both Tesla and Amazon affiliates. If you look in the description, you can see how going shopping for a solar roof, a power wall, or anything on Amazon helps out the channel. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.